New York City's subway system had seen it all: hustling commuters, street performers, late-night wanderers, and even the occasional rat sprinting across the tracks. But that evening, on a downtown-bound train, an unexpected passenger quietly entered the scene. Tall, well-dressed, and exuding an aura of quiet confidence, Barron Trump stepped onto the platform. Dressed in a sleek black coat with his hands tucked into his pockets, he looked more like someone heading to a private car service than a subway rider. But tonight, he wanted to experience the city differently, without security, without limousines, without anyone recognizing him. He had spent the afternoon reading in a quiet corner of a bookstore, and now, instead of calling for a driver, he decided to take the subway back to his family's apartment. Just this once, he wanted to see what it was like to move through the city like everyone else. The train arrived with a screech of brakes, and Barron stepped inside. The car was packed with the usual mix of people: business professionals, students, exhausted workers heading home. He spotted an empty seat near the door, next to a woman in her mid-40s who looked lost in thought, staring blankly at the floor. She wore a beige coat that had seen better days, her tired eyes rimmed with dark circles. She looked like someone carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Barron sat down beside her, unnoticed. The subway rumbled forward, passengers swaying with the movement. It was just another ride home. Or so he thought. Then, the woman sighed heavily and muttered under her breath, barely loud enough to hear. "I don't know what I'm gonna do anymore." Barron glanced at her, unsure if she was talking to herself or expecting someone to listen. Either way, he felt something in his chest tighten. He wasn't one to pry, but there was something about her tone, so full of exhaustion and quiet desperation, that made him hesitate. He could have ignored it. He could have looked away like every other passenger in the car. But instead, he turned to her and softly asked, "Are you okay?" She blinked, as if startled that someone had even noticed her. Then, after a long pause, she looked up and met his eyes. And in that moment, everything changed. The woman studied Barron's face, her tired eyes narrowing slightly. He expected her to brush him off, maybe even snap at him for prying into a stranger's business. But instead, she let out a small, humorless chuckle. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she murmured, shaking her head. "You're just some kid on the subway." "Maybe," Barron replied, his tone calm. "But sometimes it's easier to talk to someone you don't know." She exhaled slowly, tapping her fingers against the strap of her purse. "I just lost my job today," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 17 years at the same company, and they let me go like I was nothing. No warning. No severance. Just, "We're downsizing, sorry." Barron felt a pang of sympathy. He could tell by the way she spoke that this wasn't just a job to her, it was her stability, her routine, maybe even her identity. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "That's awful." She gave a weak shrug. "Yeah, well, life doesn't care about awful. Rent's due in 2 weeks. My son has a school trip I promised him. And now, I have no idea how I'm supposed to keep everything together." She let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "And here I am, unloading on some random teenager in the middle of the subway." Barron leaned back against the seat, thoughtful. The irony wasn't lost on him. If she knew who she was talking to, she might have reacted differently. But he wasn't going to mention it. "Maybe this is one of those moments," he said finally. She frowned. "What do you mean?" "The ones where a stranger says something you need to hear," he explained. "Or when something happens that you don't expect, but it pushes things in a different direction. I don't know. I just think that sometimes, when everything falls apart, it means something else is about to start." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You sound way too optimistic for someone your age." "Maybe," Barron said with a small smile. "But sometimes optimism is the only thing that gets people through the tough stuff." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to figure out what kind of person he was. "You ever been through something like this?" she asked. "Not exactly," he admitted. "But I've seen how life can change fast. And I know it's never the end of the story when you think it is. The subway slowed, approaching her stop. She sighed, adjusting the strap of her purse. Well, I guess this is where I get off, she said. Thanks for listening, kid. You didn't have to. Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out something, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. Here, he said. Just in case. She hesitated before taking it. What is it? A name. And a number, Barron said. Someone I know who might be able to help. She looked at the paper, then back at him, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Who are you? She asked. The subway doors slid open, and Barron stood up. He adjusted his coat and gave her a small, knowing smile. Just some kid on the subway. And with that, he stepped off the train, disappearing into the crowd before she could say another word. The subway doors shut with a hiss, and the train lurched forward, carrying the woman away before she could even process what had just happened. She sat frozen for a moment, gripping the small folded paper in her hand. Something about that boy had been different. He hadn't just pitied her, and he hadn't tried to throw empty words of comfort her way. He had listened. Her stop was coming up, but she barely noticed. She slowly unfolded the paper and read the handwriting inside. James Whitmore, Whitmore Financial Group. Below the name was a phone number. She frowned. The name sounded familiar. Had she heard it before? Then it hit her. James Whitmore was the CEO of a major firm in the city, a firm that had ties to some of the most powerful business leaders in the country. The realization made her stomach twist. How does some random kid on the subway have a connection to someone like this? She had half a mind to crumple the paper and throw it away. It had to be a joke, right? But something in her gut told her otherwise. When the train reached her stop, she stood and slipped the note into her coat pocket, pushing away the growing questions in her mind. She had nothing to lose. The next morning, after a restless night of debating with herself, she picked up her phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before a deep, professional voice answered. James Whitmore speaking. She hesitated. Hi. My name is Anna Reynolds. I was given your number by a young man I met yesterday. There was a slight pause on the other end. Then, Whitmore spoke again, his voice more curious now. A young man? Who exactly? Anna swallowed. He didn't say his last name. Just that his first name was Barron. The silence that followed was long enough to make her nervous. Then Whitmore let out a quiet chuckle, as if everything suddenly made sense. Ah. Barron. Anna blinked. You know him? Yes, Whitmore said. And if he sends you to me, then I'm going to listen. Anna felt her breath hitch in her throat. I wasn't sure if this was real. I assure you it is, Whitmore said. Why don't you come by my office today? We'll talk. Anna's fingers tightened around the phone. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. And yet, it was happening. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll be there. She hung up and sat still for a moment, her heart pounding. Who was that boy on the subway? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning? Anna had spent her entire career in offices, taking calls, preparing reports, handling meetings. But walking into Whitmore Financial Group that afternoon, she felt like an imposter. The lobby was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Executives in tailored suits moved with purpose, their conversations hushed but important. She approached the receptionist, clearing her throat. Hi, I have a meeting with James Whitmore. The receptionist glanced up, scanning her screen. Your name? Anna Reynolds. The receptionist nodded. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. You can head up to the 22nd floor. Anna swallowed hard. He's expecting me? A few minutes later, she stepped into Whitmore's office, a spacious, sunlit room with walls lined with books and framed awards. Behind a mahogany desk sat James Whitmore himself, a distinguished man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a presence that radiated authority. He stood as she entered, offering a warm smile. "Ms. Reynolds, please have a seat." Anna sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I have to be honest, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "I have no idea why I'm here." Whitmore leaned back, studying her with a knowing expression. "Barron sent you." Anna nodded slowly. "But I don't understand, why? Who is he?" Whitmore chuckled, shaking his head. "You really don't know, do you?" Anna frowned. "Should I?" Whitmore leaned forward slightly. "Barron Trump." Anna's heart nearly stopped. "Trump?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Whitmore said, smiling at her reaction. "That's who you met on the subway." Anna's mind raced. She thought back to the quiet confidence in the boy's voice, the way he listened without judgment, the way he had handed her Whitmore's number like it was nothing. She had been sitting next to the son of one of the most powerful men in the world, and she had no idea. I don't understand," she stammered. "Why would he send me to you?" Whitmore folded his hands on the desk. "Because Barron has a habit of noticing people who are struggling. And he knows I can help." Anna felt her throat tighten. "Help how?" Whitmore smiled. "Let's talk about your future." Anna sat frozen in her chair, her mind still struggling to catch up. "My future?" she repeated, her voice unsteady. James Whitmore nodded. "Barron wouldn't have sent you here if he didn't believe you deserved a second chance. So let's start with this. Tell me about your skills, your experience. What kind of work do you see yourself doing?" Anna hesitated. For years, she had been stuck in the same job, doing the same tasks, never really thinking about what she wanted. Now, sitting across from one of the most powerful business leaders in the city, she had to ask herself a question she hadn't considered in a long time. I worked in corporate administration. I handled operations, scheduling, budgeting, a little bit of everything, really," she said. Whitmore listened attentively, nodding. "That kind of experience is valuable," he said. "Companies need people who understand how things work behind the scenes." Anna swallowed. "But why would you help me? I mean, I appreciate this, I really do, but I'm just..." "Just what?" Whitmore interrupted gently. She sighed. "Just an ordinary person who got unlucky." Whitmore leaned forward, his expression serious. "Anna, the only difference between the people in this office and the people riding the subway is opportunity. You had yours taken away, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve another one." She felt a lump in her throat. "What are you saying?" Whitmore smiled. "I'm saying that I want to offer you a job." Anna's breath caught. "A job?" "Yes. We have an opening in operations management. Your skills fit, and I have a feeling you'll do well here." Anna stared at him, barely believing what she was hearing. "Just like that?" Whitmore chuckled. "Nothing in life is just like that. You got here because Barron saw something in you. Now it's up to you to prove him right." Tears burned at the corners of Anna's eyes, but she blinked them away. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Whitmore said, extending his hand. She shook it firmly, her heart pounding. As she left the office, she clutched the job offer letter in her hands, still in shock at how quickly everything had changed. That night, as she tucked her son into bed, she thought about the boy on the subway, the stranger who had listened, who had cared, who had done something when he didn't have to. The next morning, before heading to her first day at Whitmore Financial, she pulled out her phone and typed a simple message to the unknown number Barron had scribbled on the note. "I don't know how to thank you, but I won't waste this chance." She hesitated, then added, "You were right. It wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning." She hit send. A few moments later, her phone vibrated with a reply. "That's all I needed to hear. Good luck, Anna." She smiled, slipped her phone into her pocket, and walked into her new future.